Hare Krishna, dear devotees. Welcome back to the GBC SPT page. My name is Deva Madhavadas, and we're so excited to have His Grace Chaturatma Prabhu with us today to continue our study of the 10th canto Srimad Bhagavatam. Prabhu, welcome. How are you all?
Hare Krishna, thank you so much. Very happy to be here.
My pranams. Think of Chaturatma Prabhu when we think of Kartik, because we're so used to seeing him on parikrama and assisting Indradutta Mahārāja and other devotees in their parikramas, giving beautiful kathas. So it's especially appropriate that we have you with us today, Prabhu. And we're looking forward to hearing about the meeting of Vasudeva and Nanda Mahārāja, a very mysterious happening, the two fathers of Krishna coming together to have a discussion. So excited to hear from you today, and thank you, devotees, for joining us.
Thank you. Pranam to God and the Acharyas. Om Jnana Timirandasya Jananjana Shalakaya Chaksu Unmilitam Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha. Mukam Karoti Vachalam Pangum Lam Jayate Girim Yakripa Tamaham Bande Sri Gurum Dinatarino. Vanchakapaturi Vishakripa Sindhavecha Patitanam Pavanevyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Jaya Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Shikaradhar Shivasiti Gaura Bhaktivinoda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. I was watching as we were opening this session, the beautiful cover page that they put together for this, celebrating Kartik, enriching our Krishna consciousness. This is exactly what Kartik is for us, a way to enrich our Krishna consciousness. I was very much surprised on Dandabats this morning when I was looking through it. There was a video, short little video clip that I had made about the importance of Kartik posted there on Dandabats. And I kind of looked at that again after a few years back. And every bit as relevant then as it is now. The month of Kartik is a very, very important time for us, particularly as the GBC SPT team has put together here this subject of Krishna's presence in Vrindavan. Of course, many of us like to be in Vrindavan for Kartik and enrich ourselves by visiting the different pilgrimage places. But that's not always possible, especially in these times we're in now. So we have this opportunity of this technology to share, even though we have distances separating us. And particularly to share this very, very important chapter of the Bhagavatam. I think it's an interesting thing to point out that we're dealing with the particular subject matter of the Bhagavatam, both from the point of view of Krishna book and from the point of view of the Srimad Bhagavatam. Srila Prabhupada, many times he said this, he had no idea how long he would be with us. So in the beginning, he gave the Krishna book. No translations, no Sanskrit verses, just a commentary, so to speak, on the entire 10th canto, giving us an opportunity, even at an early stage of our Krishna consciousness, to experience this subject matter because he felt it was so important. And then, as to our great fortune, Prabhupada did stay with us much longer. He continued on. This particular section of the Bhagavatam, Srimad Bhagavatam, the 5th chapter, is nearing the end of Prabhupada winding down his manifest Leela on this earthly planet. So the instructions he gives here are very, very important. One can take hours upon hours upon hours to parallel these two presentations of this subject matter from the Krishna book and from the actual 5th canto verses, 5th chapter verses of the 10th canto. We don't have that kind of time. So I'm going to go through the 5th chapter from the Krishna book, and we're going to highlight and speak about what I consider to be important points here. And as Deva Madhava alluded to, this is a mystery of Krishna's appearance, that he has two fathers. It's before our modern times when one might find themselves with two fathers or two mothers, and what that would mean in our current society. But it is indicative of the fact that Krishna is not bound by any restraints of our so-called material world. So we find here in this 5th chapter, actually before starting the 5th chapter, I want to look at the opening explanation to the Srimad Bhagavatam version of the 5th chapter. We see in the Bhagavatam that it was only later, somewhere around the 3rd or 4th canto, I can't remember exactly now, where Prabhupada began to do introductions to the chapters. I asked the different devotees that were both traveling with Prabhupada and Dravida, who was doing editing and all, and they said Prabhupada simply supplied this and they started putting it in. So in this presentation of the 5th chapter in the Srimad Bhagavatam, Prabhupada makes the following comment here. As it is described in this chapter, Nanda Mahārāja very gorgeously performed the birth ceremony for his newborn child. Then he went to Kamsa to pay taxes that were due and meet his intimate friend Vasudeva. There was great jubilation all over Vrindavan due to Krishna's birth. Everyone was overwhelmed with joy. Therefore, the king of Braja, Nanda Mahārāja, wanted to perform the birth ceremony for his child, and this he did. During this great festival, Nanda Mahārāja gave in charity to all present whatever they desired. After the festival, Nanda Mahārāja put the cowherd men in charge of protecting Gokul, and then he went to Mathura to pay official taxes to Kamsa. In Mathura, Nanda Mahārāja met Vasudeva. Nanda Mahārāja and Vasudeva were brothers, and Vasudeva praised Nanda Mahārāja's good fortune because he knew that Krishna had accepted Nanda Mahārāja as his father. When Vasudeva inquired from Nanda Mahārāja about the welfare of the child, Nanda Mahārāja informed him all about Vrindavan, and Vasudeva was very much satisfied by this, although he expressed his grief because Devaki's many children had been killed by Kamsa. Nanda Mahārāja consoled Vasudeva by saying that everything happens according to destiny, and that one who knows this is not aggrieved. Expecting many disturbances in Gokula, Vasudeva then advised Nanda Mahārāja not to wait in Mathura but to return to Vrindavan as soon as possible. Thus, Nanda Mahārāja took leave of Vasudeva and returned to Vrindavan with the other cowherd men on their bullock carts. So this is the introduction Prabhupada gives us to this chapter, highlighting the major topics that he's going to cover in these verses and in his presentation as the Krishna book. Most importantly, we see here the very kind and loving relationship between Nanda and Vasudeva. The circumstance in our material world where there are the occasions of split families or multiple parents due to divorce or remarrying or all of these different types of things that we find nowadays do not always manifest healthy and wholesome relationships between all the individuals involved. Many times we find it's quite the opposite. But here, this chapter gives a very wonderful appreciation that Nanda Mahārāja and Vasudeva have for each other. Now, if we go back to the Krishna book, there's a very important point made here that I'd like to highlight. And here's what Prabhupada says. Although Krishna was the real son of Vasudeva and Devaki, because of Kamsa's atrocious activities, Vasudeva could not enjoy the birth ceremony of his son. But Nanda Mahārāja, the foster father, celebrated the birth ceremony of Krishna very joyfully. The next day, it was declared that a male child had been born to Jasoda. According to Vedic custom, Nanda Mahārāja called for the learned astrologers and Brahmins to perform the birth ceremony. After the birth of a child, the astrologers calculate the moment of the birth and make a horoscope of the child's future life. This simple activity that's described here, we find prevalent even to our modern times by qualified astrologers. I just had the recent good fortune of a 5th grandchild being born to me, not to me, but into my family. And immediately getting the information, we had a devotee astrologer calculate that chart and get the information. This is of great interest to the parents because Prabhupada indicated that these children taking birth in our ISKCON society from devotee parents are not ordinary children. So we like to know what is going on, what will their future be, what can be done. This was even done in the case of Srila Prabhupada. We know that Prabhupada's chart, it's indicated that he would travel the ocean at a later stage in his life and open many temples. These different types of things are there. So parents take great comfort in seeing these things. Now, Prabhupada continues, before the birth ceremony, the family members take bath, cleanse themselves, and decorate themselves with ornaments and nice garments. Then they come before the child and the astrologer to hear the future life of the child. Nanda Mahārāja and other members of the family dressed and sat down in front of the birthplace. All the brahmanas who were assembled there on this occasion chanted auspicious mantras according to the rituals, while the astrologers performed the birth ceremony. All the demigods are also worshipped on this occasion, as well as the forefathers of the family. Nanda Mahārāja distributed to the Brahmins 200,000 cows, which were well decorated with cloth and ornaments. He gave the Brahmins not only cows in charity, but also hills of grain decorated with ornaments and gold-bordered cloth. This is such a glorious description of a big ceremony. This is not a small circumstance. The manner in which the family members approach it, Prabhupada makes point, cleaning themselves very nicely, decorating themselves elaborately, coming before the astrologer. You've got Brahmins in the different parts of the room chanting different mantras from the 4 different Vedas, one can imagine, Purusha Shukta, different slokas like that. You've got the astrologers sitting there doing their charts, doing their calculations, consulting amongst themselves. We'll be speaking in a few days about how this happened also with the life of Narottam. Multiple scholars consulting and then giving a presentation to Nanda Mahārāja. And then in the process of this, being so satisfied, Nanda Mahārāja gives great charity, distributes wealth to all those who are qualified, in this case, the Brahmanas here. This is an important part of any type of aspect of performance of jaga or household ceremony, the distribution of one's wealth, the sharing of one's assets. Prabhupada uses the word kripana to indicate one who miserly holds on to everything they have. We find that in many of today's wealthy men, women, families, dynasties, where they keep all that wealth internal, sometimes just in the bank, sometimes invested, not distributing it. But then we see others that very easily distribute that wealth. And Nanda Mahārāja is the perfect example of this. We understand that he had great wealth at his disposal, and he shared that with those that were qualified. Prabhupada speaks to this point here. He says, in the material world, we possess riches and wealth in many ways, but sometimes not in very honest and pious ways, because that is the nature of accumulating wealth. Funny little story. I sometimes bite the end of my tongue and get this little bump there. And I asked my dentist about it, and the dentist said, well, in the trade, we call those liar bumps, fibbing bumps. He said, have you told any stories? And I joked, I said, I'm in the sales business. Of course I told stories. So Prabhupada's making that point that sometimes acquiring one's wealth does not come to the most honest means. Therefore, one should purify such wealth by giving cows and gold in charity to the Brahmins. The newborn child is also purified by the gifts of grains in charity to the Brahmins. How is that? Because the Brahmins are not thinking, oh, great, I just got some nice gifts, now I can go home. When they are given wealth, they reciprocate that by giving blessings. During the performance of any homa, at the end of it, dakshina is given to the priest. The priest doesn't simply take that, put it in his pocket, and go home. At the time of that exchange, the priest has certain mantras he chants, giving blessings back to the yajamana, or the sponsors. So in the same way, the Brahmins here give blessings to the child when they're receiving charity. In this way, the entire society benefits from this mutual sharing of the wealth and opulence. In the material world, it is to be understood that we always live in a contaminated state. We therefore have to purify the duration of our lives, our possession of wealth, and our own self. We can purify our duration of life by taking bath and cleansing the body inside and out, and accepting the 10 types of purificatory process. Another mantra used at the different types of performing jagas, initiations, Om Pavitra Pavitrava, Sarvavashtam Katopiva, Yasmarat Pundarikaksham, Savaya Bantara Jyoti. So we chant this, indicating that internally, externally, so much impurity is there. But by remembering the holy name, by remembering Pundarikaksham, that lotus-eyed Lord, one becomes purified. So Prabhupada's indicating here that this is the way to purify the duration of one's life. these different types of samskaras, and bathing inside and keeping oneself pure inside. Then he mentions by austerities, by worship of the Lord, and by distribution of charity, we purify the possession of our wealth. And we can purify ourselves by studying the Vedas in order to understand the absolute truth and achieve self-realization. It is therefore stated in the Vedic literature that everyone by birth is a Sudra. We all know that verse, Kalo Sudra Sambhava. That by accepting the purificatory process, one becomes twice born. By studying the Vedas, one becomes a Vipra. And this is the preliminary qualification for becoming a Brahmin. And then one understands the absolute truth to become a pure Brahmin. When a Brahmin reaches further perfection, he becomes a Vaishnava. So it's a very nice progression Prabhupada gives us. We're all born low-class Sudra. But by accepting the process of purification, we become twice born. And then after being purified by studying the Vedas, we can elevate ourselves to the knowledge, to the position of a Vipra, one who has knowledge, one who has intelligence, understanding. And this is the beginning qualification for becoming a Brahmin. We know the 26 qualities of a Brahmin, and knowledge is one of those, of course. And once one becomes a Brahmin, by further training under the spiritual master, by listening to the acharyas, by acting in one's particular dharmic way, one then can become a Vaishnava. So it's not an easy thing to become a Vaishnava. We throw that around addressing ourselves so many different ways, but one can easily become a Vaishnava by practicing this process. So we see that during Krishna's birth ceremony, this is what was going on. It's very tempting to read this 5th chapter paragraph by paragraph and speak on these different points Prabhupada makes. However, as we don't have such a large amount of time, because our highlight here is going to be Nanda and Vasudeva's meeting, we want to skip a little bit ahead here. In this next paragraph, though, Prabhupada does give a further description of just what a glorious and big event this is. Different types of chanting, and he mentions the 4 types of chanters: the Suttas, the Magadhas, the Vandi, and the Virodhavali. These are the 4 different persons, and each of those 4 has a particular type of glorification and mantra that they chant. And then Prabhupada talks about the not only different types of mantras, but the different types of sounds, singing of songs, performing bugles, kettle drums, all outside the house being performed to raise a festive atmosphere. Artistic drawings done with rice pulp and scented water everywhere. I had this experience when I was fortunate enough to travel with Padayatra. As we would go through the villages, many of the villagers, in anticipation of the Padayatra's arrival, would decorate their homes in this way. And in the front of all the houses, you would see these different rangoli, as they're called. Different types of flags and festoons, and green leaves such as mango and banana were decorated everywhere. Cows and bulls, they were all smeared with oil and turmeric and painted with different types of minerals. And Prabhupada makes an interesting point here. He says that the cows all wore garlands of peacock feathers and were covered with nice colored cloths and gold necklaces. So there's a little indication who can wear peacock feathers. Certainly if the cow can, Gornitai can. So at any rate, Prabhupada continues on like this, discussing the birth of Krishna, the beauty of the cowherd men, the beauty of the cowherd women, as they came to this festive occasion at the house of Nanda Mahārāja and Mother Jasoda, how they were very, very happy to share, their just this whole festive mood throughout the whole village. And then Prabhupada mentions here, he said, when the cowherd men saw the pastimes of the cowherd women and their joyousness, they also became very joyful. And in response, they began to throw yogurt, milk, clarified butter, and water upon each other. This is really quite a festive occasion. Not only just the description of the different types of music and decorations, but everybody's very, very happy. And the opulence is such that milk, yogurt, ghee can all be thrown about. What we would maybe in not such glorious terms nowadays call a food fight. but in this way, in a very pleasant way, and done in a very mode of goodness manner. We see sometimes nowadays the function of holy, or during these times in India, it gets quite ruckus, maybe even not so respectful. I remember reading in the performance of the first Gaur Purnima at Katuri with Narottam and Janavamata, that when time for Holi came, it describes how, with great respect and very gently, Janavamata presented the holy colors to the deities and then sprinkled them on the devotees. So in a very respectful way, all of this is being done. And then Prabhupada concludes all of this description by noting a very, very important point. And he calls it that. He says, this is a very important point to note in connection as to how wealthy the inhabitants of Vrindavan were simply by raising cows. All the cowherdmen belonged to the Vaishya community, and their business was to protect the cows and cultivate crops. By their dress, by their ornaments, and by their behavior, it appears that although they lived in a small village, they were still rich in material possessions. We tend to think that wealth, at least in our modern society, that if you're wealthy, this means you live in a big city, you have some big house, some penthouse on some very prominent street, multiple homes throughout the world, traveling and living very luxuriously. These may be signs of wealth, but here, Prabhupada notes that even though these residents lived in a small village, they were still very rich in material possessions. And one of those reasons is because they were simply taking care of the cows, protecting the cows and cultivating crops. This is very pleasing to Krishna. And when Krishna is pleased, he gives all opulence and wealth like this. And Prabhupada mentions their wealth was milk, yogurt, clarified butter, other types of milk products, and trading in agricultural products, which facilitated their being able to have different types of jewelry and ornaments and costly garments. But not only personal wealth, as we've mentioned, but able to give in charity very lavishly. So this is the importance of one's wealth, highlighting that point here again. Prabhupada continues on to speak more about the festival there. It's very, very wonderful. Now, we come to this important point in the celebration. After the birth ceremony, Nanda Mahārāja decided to go to Mathura to pay the annual tax to the government of Kamsa. Before leaving, he called for the able cowherdmen of the village and asked them to take care of Vrindavan in his absence. So Nanda Mahārāja has a responsibility as the king of Vrindavan. He's not an independent king. He has to pay tax. Prabhupada indicates in several places that the tax would be 25%, straight out. Whatever profit one gained that year due to one's agricultural activities or business activities, 25% went to the government. And then after that, there were no further taxes. No gas tax, no heating tax, no vacation tax, no birth tax, no death tax, all these taxes. So Nanda Mahārāja had this obligation to pay this. So he took that very seriously. And even though the government of Kamsa was not, Kamsa was not the nicest guy. We all know his nature. I mean, at this point, he's already killed several of Devaki and Vasudev's children. He's already threatened to kill his own sister on her wedding day. So we know the nature of Kamsa, but he was the ruler. So therefore, Nanda Mahārāja did his due diligence. He arranged to go, but he didn't just leave. He put all of the senior cowherd men, all those that were capable and able to look after Vrindavan in his absence. Now, it mentions that when Nanda Mahārāja arrived in Mathura, Vasudeva got the news and was very eager to congratulate his friend. He immediately went to the place where Nanda Mahārāja was staying. When Nanda saw Vasudeva, he felt that he had regained his life. Nanda, overwhelmed with joy, immediately stood up and embraced Vasudeva. Vasudeva was received very warmly and offered a nice place to sit. We can just imagine this scene. Nanda Mahārāja and Vasudeva have not seen each other in a very long time. It is commonly known that Vasudeva has been in a very difficult situation, to say the least. Much of his time in prison, His children taken by Kamsa and killed. He and his wife in a very distressed condition, to the point to where Vasudeva had sent Rohini to live under the protection of Nanda Mahārāja. So all of these things were known. This wasn't a secret to anyone. So when these two long lost dear friends of each other see, there's a great picture of happiness, embracing one another, just great joy and satisfaction. We know that there are different ways one receives an honored guest. Most notably, the minimal way is to give some kind words, some place to sit, and a glass of water. Though in a more elaborate way, any one of 5 to 16 upacharas may be offered, just as we do with the deities, giving a place to sit, washing the feet, giving a mouth rinse, giving some nice foods, offering of lamps, offering of incense, offering of pleasant words, like this. So in this way, Nanda Mahārāja and Vasudeva have greeted each other and are now seated and very anxious to know about the sons that had been placed under the protection of Nanda Mahārāja. Vasudeva begins to inquire. Prabhupada adds an important point to this sentence. I'll read it here. Anxious about his two sons, namely Krishna and Balaram, who had been put under the protection of Nanda Mahārāja without Nanda's knowledge. Vasudeva inquired about them with great anxiety. Vasudeva is holding a great secret here. Just imagine this. He has this mood within his heart of love for his two boys, Krishna and Balaram. But he cannot reveal this to Nanda Mahārāja. He doesn't want to reveal this because he doesn't want any complication in the relationship. So within his own heart, he is keeping this great love, but he wants to inquire how they're doing. He's placed them under Nanda Mahārāja's care because he knows in the care of Nanda Mahārāja, they'll be protected, they'll be raised nicely, they'll be looked after, they'll be given all education. So, but nonetheless, because he is their father, he has this great anxiety to know how they're doing. Prabhupada says clearly, both Balaram and Krishna were the sons of Vasudeva. Balaram, of course, we know, was transferred to the room of Rohini, who, as Vasudeva's wives, had been sent to Vrindavan to be under the protection of Nanda Mahārāja and avoid the horrors of Kamsa's reign. Krishna, of course, we know Vasudeva personally delivered to Jasoda. Just imagine the fortitude of parental love that we find in Vasudeva. One son has been transferred to Rohini, and Rohini has been sent to the care of Nanda Mahārāja. The other son he personally takes and gives to Jasoda and Nanda Mahārāja, trading his son for their daughter. Why does he do this? Because he knows this is the only way to save Krishna. Now, of course, we know Krishna doesn't need to be saved in that manner, but this is all part of the eternal Leela of Vasudeva as the father of Krishna. It's interesting, in the Srimad Bhagavatam section of this chapter, Prabhupada makes a comment about the gatekeepers, about the guards, and it's not a very appreciative one. That generally these personalities are not very trusted. So somehow or another, they're not performing their duty to the best of their ability, and Vasudeva is able to get out under the influence of Yogamaya and go, and he switches. So Prabhupada concludes, Vasudeva, of course, was aware of this fact and inquired very eagerly about Krishna and Balaram. So Vasudeva addresses Nanda Mahārāja. He says, my dear brother, you're old and very anxious to beget a son, and yet you had none. Now, by the grace of the Lord, you are fortunate to have a very nice son. I think this incident is very auspicious for you. My dear friend, I was imprisoned by Kamsa, and now I have been released. Therefore, this is another birth for me. I had no hope of seeing you again, but by God's grace, I can now see you. So Prabhupada points out that In this way, Vasudeva is indirectly expressing his anxiety about Krishna. He notes that Nanda Mahārāja had a great desire to have a son, that he was very anxious for this. This is a very common thread amongst the life of a householder. Daughters and sons alike are very much appreciated. Sons carry on the family line. I have 2 daughters and a son. I love them all very much. The son has a son, so now I know the family line will continue. This is the nature of daughters and sons. Daughters marry into another family line and continue that line. So it's the desire of every father to have a son to carry on that family line of theirs. So in this way, Vasudeva's expressing a bit of anxiety about the well-being of Krishna, indicating his own difficult circumstances and how he had no expectations of being freed from prison, of surviving the ordeal of being in prison, what to speak of seeing Nanda Mahārāja again. So somehow or another, he's been very fortunate that this has now happened, he says. And the conclusion of Vasudeva's concern, the indication of that is his sending Krishna to Nanda Mahārāja through the Vrindavan forest, where, as we've already described, very gloriously the celebration of his birth is taking place. In prison, Vasudeva was not able to celebrate the birth of any of his children in any glorious way. He tried to keep most of it as quiet as possible because he knew Kamsa was going to kill these children. And when the 8th child was born, the very child that Kamsa was the most fearful of, Kamsa's anxiety, Devaki's anxiety, was at its zenith. So the arrangement was to transfer the child. And as Vasudeva says about his own release from birth, his own release from prison, and inwardly he's thinking, my being able to see that Krishna is going to live in your village, this is a new birth for me. He didn't expect that Krishna would live because all the other sons had been killed by Kamsa. Of course, who can kill Krishna? Certainly not Kamsa, especially when Krishna's desire is to have these wonderful pastimes in Vrindavan. So in this way, Vasudeva considers that being freed from Kamsa, both himself and his son, it's been like a new birth for him. The Vasudeva continues, my dear friend, it is very difficult for us to live together. Although we have our family, our relatives, our sons, our daughters, by nature's way, we are generally separated from one another. The reason for this is that every living entity appears on this earth under different pressures of fruitive activities. Although they assemble together, there is no certainty of their remaining together for a long time. According to one's fruitive activities, one has to act differently and thereby be separated. For example, many plants and creepers are floating on the waves of the ocean. Sometimes they come together, sometimes they separate forever. One plant goes one way, one plant goes another. Similarly, our family assembly may be very nice while we're all living together, but after some time, in the course of the waves of time, we are separated. This particular paragraph here in the Krishna book really hit home to me. As I mentioned, I'm the father of 3 children, all of which live elsewhere. One on the entire other side of the world, one in the far north, and one on the other coast of this country. So it is with a bit of devotional jealousy, one might say, that I watch as other parents and grandparents here in this community where I live have their children surrounding them and take them to the different programs and all like that. And it's a little difficult. Vasudeva points this out. He says it's sometimes very difficult for us to live together. Why is this? Because every living entity appears in this world under some type of fruitive karma, some type of fruitive arrangement that requires different functions in their life that may not include living together as one big happy family. We often like to speak about how in ancient times, Vedic times, that the families generally lived together in one large house or in a communal house that was quite large, and everyone had their own separate quarters, and then there was a joint area where they were all joined together for meals and festivals and things of this nature. Here, Vasudeva indicates that even at that time, this was not necessarily so. Every living entity appears in this world and has their own karma to work through. Now, as we're raising these living entities when they're children, we can guide and direct their path. This is the purpose of parents. This is their duty, to guide and direct the beneficial path of the children. But at a certain point, the children become mature, and the inherited fruitive karma begins to manifest itself in their life, and their own path begins to be charted out. Now, when one takes the devotional life, this can be overseen. One can bypass that, but much of our life is spent in executing mixed devotional service. So we're not always on the pure devotional platform where everything is simply orchestrated by Krishna's hand. So we may see that our children go this way and that way, study this, study that. Prabhupada gives the indication how one having very high parentage does not necessarily indicate that they will also be of that same line. He looks at ourselves. I'm listening currently in the mornings to a series of lectures from the early Srimad Bhagavatam given in Los Angeles in 1972. And Srila Prabhupada repeatedly refers to the flowers of your country, as he called us, and how the children have given up everything. They've given up their family. They've given up their occupation. They've given up their education. They've given up everything to live like hippies, but they're still not happy. So he says, by the process of taking to devotional service, we can actually become happy. But this is the nature of every living entity. They have this karma that they've come to this world with that they have to sort out on their own. So the parents will give some guidance, the parents will give some direction, but ultimately, as the example given in this Krishna book chapter here, the creepers on the waves, they may come together, they may be separated and never see each other again. So similarly, Prabhupada says, our family may be very nice when we're assembled together, but after some time, in the course of the waves of time, we will be separated. So we shouldn't take too much distress and anxiety when we see this happening in our modern world. It's just the nature of this life. Prabhupada continues here. The purport of this expression by Vasudeva is this. Although he had 8 sons born in the womb of Devaki, unfortunately, they were all gone. He could not even keep his one son, Krishna, with him. Vasudeva was feeling the separation of Krishna, but he could not express this real fact. Please tell me about the welfare of Vrindavan, he asked. You have many animals. Are the animals happy? Are they getting sufficient grass and water? Please also let me know whether the place you're living is undisturbed and peaceful. This inquiry was made by Vasudeva because he was anxious about Krishna's safety. We mentioned that when Vasudeva sat down with Nanda Mahārāja, he guised the nature of his questions, but in his heart, he had this great anxiety. And so knowing that he couldn't even keep his own son, Krishna, and that the other sons come before, the other children before had been killed, he had some concern. But he couldn't say straight up, you've got my son Krishna, and Kamsa's such a rascal, he may come to Vrindavan and cause him. He had to ask in a guised way, not expressing the real fact. So, how do you know? What's the welfare of Vrindavan? Is everything fine in Vrindavan? And how are your animals? Are they very happy? Are they experiencing any distress? Is there sufficient grass and water? Is the place where you're living undisturbed and peaceful? This was his way to find out what is the environment in which Krishna is living. Because at this point, we hadn't seen much in the way of demons. Shortly, we will see them begin to manifest. Putana, Trinabarta, and then all of the different demons throughout his cow herd boy Leela. So all of this is not yet manifest. So Vasudeva is inquiring from Nanda Mahārāja, how are things in Vrindavan? And if he hears that they're very peaceful, then he knows, all right, this will be all right. Prabhupada continues. This inquiry was made by Vasudeva because he was anxious about Krishna's safety. He knew that Kamsa and his followers were trying to kill Krishna and would send various kinds of demons. They had already resolved that all children born within 10 days of the birth of Krishna should be killed. Because Vasudeva was so anxious about Krishna, he inquired about the safety of his residence, Krishna's residence. He also inquired about Balaram and his mother Rohini, who had been entrusted to the care of Nanda Mahārāja. Vasudeva also reminded Nanda Mahārāja that Balaram did not know his real father. Vasudeva says, he knows you as his father. And now you have another child, Krishna. And I think that you're taking very nice care of both of them. So here we see the continued concern that Vasudeva has because of his knowledge of Kamsa and because of the statements of Kamsa, of his intent to kill Krishna, of his intent to kill that eighth child, and knowing that that eighth child had escaped. Therefore, the order he sent out that all children born within 10 days of Krishna should all be killed. Such a horrific instruction, such a horrible person Kamsa is. Not only to threaten to kill his sister, not only to kill all of her children, but when the eighth child escapes, to then kill all the children born within a certain time period in that area. So Vasudeva's inquiring, has this edict of Kamsa reached Vrindavan? Is Vrindavan safe? He knows what's going on, but he doesn't want to quite give all these details to Nanda Mahārāja because he's trying to protect Krishna. Prabhupada makes a point here. It's also significant that Vasudeva inquired about the welfare of Nanda Mahārāja's animals. The animals, and especially the cows, were protected exactly in the manner of one's own children. Vasudeva was a Kshatriya. Nanda Mahārāja was a Vaishya. It is the duty of the Kshatriyas to protect the citizens, and it is the duty of the Vaishyas to protect the cows. The cows are just as important as the citizens. Just as human citizens should be given all kinds of protection, so the cows also should be given full protection. So, very important point made here. Everyone has the responsibility to give protection according to their means. Excuse me. Vasudeva as a Kshatriya was to give duty to the citizens. Nanda Mahārāja as a Vaishya was to give protection, to give protection to the citizens, and Nanda Mahārāja as a Vaishya was to give protection to the cows. They both had this responsibility of giving protection, just a different source. But Prabhupada continues to say that giving protection to the cows is just the same as giving protection to the citizens, because the cows are also the citizens. In the series of lectures I mentioned I'm listening to in the mornings, he makes a point about this horrible system of slaughterhouses and the slaughter of the innocent cows, and how this whole process is the great detriment to human society. One thinks that only my particular kind are worthy of protection. The quote that Prabhupada uses that some people put forth is that the animals have no consciousness, they have no soul. Of course, here in our American culture, it was thought by certain individuals that certain races of people had no consciousness and no soul. Certain sexes had no consciousness and no soul. So this type of degraded thinking, this type of ignorant thinking, to use the word, is there by persons that want to exploit others. And what is the worst type of exploitation? The unnecessary slaughter of cows. So Prabhupada mentions here the cow should be given full protection because the cow is seen just like the mother. Gives the milk, gives a product that takes a product that is of no use to us, grass, and turns it into milk, which can be made into yogurt and butter and ghee and so many different wonderful products. So this is the necessity of the Vaishya, who is protected in return by the Kshatriya. And the Kshatriyas, of course, they're guided by the Brahmins. So this is the way society works jointly together to bring about a very peaceful circumstance. Prabhupada continues here. Vasudeva continued to say that the maintenance of religious principles, dharma, of economic development, karma, and the satisfactory execution of the meeting of the demands of the senses depends upon the cooperation among relatives, nations, and all of humanity. Therefore, it is everyone's duty to see that his fellow citizens and cows are not put into difficulty. One should see to the peace and comfort of his fellow man and of the animals. The development of religious principles, economic development, and sense gratification can then be achieved without difficulty. So here's a very, very clear direction from Prabhupada how one can live very peacefully. The relatives, the nations, and all of humanity can work together to follow religious principles, and that will result in very comfortable economic development, and that will automatically give satisfaction to the senses. The senses have to be satisfied in some means or another. By putting Krishna at the center of satisfying our senses, the Rishikesha, one who is the source of these senses, then everything becomes very auspicious. Just as Prabhupada said, it is the duty of every householder to have the deity in their home, because then it transforms the home from a place for sense gratification to a place for serving Krishna. When Krishna is the center of all one's sense gratification, what one sees, what one hears, 9th canto of the Bhagavatam, the story of Ambarish Maharaj, Savai Mana Krishna Padartha Mindayo, that all of his senses, after the mind was focused on Krishna, all of the senses were engaged accordingly. And thus he got great satisfaction and advancement in devotional life. So we can be a society, a collection of humanity, a collection of family members whose sole purpose is individual sense gratification, and that will bring about no cohesive happiness, because everyone's sense gratification is different. My sense gratification comes at the exploitation of you. This is the nature of me first, my senses first, my enjoyment first. But when we put that aside and put Krishna in the center, then we become very, very happy collectively. And this is what Vasudeva is pointing out, that by this type of focus, one becomes very happy and everything can be achieved without any difficulty. Vasudeva then continues that he expresses his sorrow due to not being able to give protection to his own sons born of Devaki. He was thinking that religious principles, economic development, and the satisfaction of his senses were therefore all lost. But by this type of introspective look at himself, it causes Nanda Mahārāja to respond accordingly. Nanda Mahārāja hears him talking like this, and Nanda Mahārāja says, "My dear Vasudeva, I know that you are very much aggrieved because the cruel King Kamsa," cruel seems like an understatement here, "the cruel King Kamsa has killed all your sons born of Devaki. Although the last child was a daughter, Kamsa could not kill her, and she has entered into the celestial planets." So this is instructive here. Nanda Mahārāja knows that the last child was born, that the last child was not a boy, and that last child was a daughter. But in reality, we know, as does Vasudeva, that last child was a son, and that he took that son to Nanda and Jasoda and transferred his son for the daughter and brought her back, so that it appeared that the 8th child was indeed not the son that had been predicted, but instead a daughter. Then Nanda Mahārāja continues, excuse me, "My dear friend, do not be aggrieved. We are all being controlled by our past unseen activities. Everyone is subjected to his past deeds. And one who is conversant in the philosophy of karma and its reactions is considered a man of knowledge, as we said earlier, Vipra. Such a person will not be aggrieved by any incident, happy or miserable. This is the basic instructions of Bhagavad Gita. So, Sukha Dukkha. One's going to have happiness, one's going to have distress. But a equal poised man, a pandita, he sees all of these things equally. He's not disturbed. The entire second chapter of the Gita is on this type of instruction, how to be equipoised, how to be peaceful. So upon getting this instruction from his dear friend Nanda Mahārāja, Vasudeva replies, "My dear Nanda, if you have already paid your government taxes, then please return very soon to your place, because I think that there may be some disturbances in Gokula." Here, Vasudeva is aware of what's coming and indicating it to Nanda Mahārāja without spelling it out. He's giving Nanda Mahārāja this warning. Trouble is coming to Gokula. It's very peaceful now. The cows are very happy. The residents are very happy. You've just had this wonderful birth celebration, Jata Karma, of Krishna, and great festivities, and everyone's on a very high platform of happiness right now. But mark my word, this is going to be changed very soon. Disturbances will start coming. And of course, we have Putana, Trinavarta, Sakatashura, all these different demons begin to make their way into Vrindavan, into Gokula, and things become very difficult. And ultimately, we know further down the storyline, Nanda Mahārāja has to change where he's living. So in this way, there's this very friendly conversation between Nanda Mahārāja and Vasudeva, and it includes instructions from one to the other, while not giving them in a condescending manner. This is a very important point. It is our duty, it is our nature in our relationships to be instructive, to give guidance to each other. But how this is done indicates the nature of the relationship. It shouldn't be done condescendingly. It shouldn't be done with arrogance. It should be done very thoughtfully, very politely, and with great concern for the well-being of the other person. This is what we see in the exchange between Nanda Mahārāja and Vasudeva. Some shared mutual points of interest, some philosophical guidance, some personal realizations, and then some conclusions for the benefit of the other. This is what we see here in this pastime described in this 5th chapter, Vasudeva and Nanda Mahārāja meeting each other. So Prabhupada concludes this chapter. After the friendly conversation between Nanda Mahārāja and Vasudeva, Vasudeva returned to his home. Nanda Mahārāja and the other cowherd men who had come along with him to Mathura to pay their taxes also returned to their homes in Gokula. So this concludes this 5th chapter of the Krishna book, the meeting of Nanda Mahārāja and Vasudeva. And it's very instructive. One can go to the Srimad Bhagavatam presentation of this also, and Prabhupada breaks out each of these verses that make up this 5th chapter of the Krishna book he's given, and then gives his purports to them as well. So it's a very nice meditation on this particular Kartik time, that we can have this mood of reflecting on what's going on in Vrindavan. What are the activities and pastimes taking place in Vrindavan? Absorbing ourselves in them, discussing them with each other, and ultimately trying to see how they encourage and enrich, as our title for this particular month is, how they enrich our own devotional service. This is the mood that is encouraged in our devotional life, and this is what we find in this particular chapter here. So we'll conclude there, trying to keep within the time frame that I've been asked to here. And I'm not quite sure how we're going to do any of the questions here. I don't see anything in the, I see here there's a comment page there. I guess I would be foolish in not noting, for all of you that are listening or that will see this as a recorded document, that there are links to my YouTube channel and my website, to which there are large collection of discussions on Vaishnavacharyas, lectures at different places in Kartik. As Devamata said at the introduction, it is quite unusual for me not to be in Vrindavan during Kartik. This is unfortunately my second year of this type of restriction. Life is what it is, but we have to find our solace wherever we are. We shouldn't let our consciousness be solely dependent upon our external residence, our external place of executing service. Our consciousness has to be internal. Our Krishna consciousness has to be internal. So this opportunity of being able to understand, how these subject matters can enrich us, especially during this month of Kartik, is very, very important. I'm going to take a quick look here at the comments sections and see if anyone has any questions. I don't see anything here. All right, so we'll finish there. I thank the members of the GBC SPT team for inviting me to speak on this particular chapter of the Srimad Bhagavatam. And I thank all of you for listening attentively, we hope. And I thank Srila Prabhupada for giving us this opportunity to share together, and wish all of you a very happy Kartik, a very successful Kartik Vrata, and a very happy path in the line of devotional service. All right. So we'll finish there for the day. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. All glories to Kartika Devi, Srimati Radharani.